Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. So, today I'm going to be talking about leveraging your menstrual cycle for success in your business. I have hopped in here before. Hi, Renae. Renae is here. I'm going to be talking about this topic with Renae. Um, let me talked about here before on how to sync it with your workouts. So I'm excited to take this conversation further with Renee today and talk about business. Hi,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am fantastic. How's your day been so far?
Oh, shuttling and driving kids and dropping kids off. And I've like literally been in my my car taking calls all morning because I haven't had enough time to even drive home yet. So we're good. We're good.
Well, that's
Work
awesome, and
hard.
it's a great segue to our topic too, on how like you can actually have that energy to do more, because you sync everything with your cycle. So I'd like to start, Renee, with first like a little bit more about you. Like, tell us your story. When was the moment when you kind of like became aware of the power of your menstrual cycle? Yeah, let's just take it from there.
Yeah. Well, so probably about 7 years ago, I was pregnant with my youngest, and my husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And in that season of life was when I realized like we only live once. We are not guaranteed tomorrow. How could I live today the best that I wanted to live it? So that was what prompted me to go into network marketing and trying to create more financial freedom, creating more time freedom. Like, how could I really create this life that I wanted to live? And found that I was hustling a lot. Like, not only was I building my side hustle, but I was working at the hospital. I was raising my kids. I was trying to drive my husband back and forth everywhere. Like, life just got so busy and so crazy. And so that was when I got to a point where eventually I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, maybe being an entrepreneur is just not made for me. Like, everybody else is seeing all the success, it's working for everybody else. And I reached out to a mentor of mine and was like, I am like literally bleeding from the knuckles. Like, I'm doing so much. And her response to me was, you just have to do more. Like, business is just a numbers game. If you're not getting the numbers that you want, you just have to do more numbers. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, I cannot, there's no more of me to give. And a friend of mine reached out and she was like, I was in her mastermind and she had somebody come speak about how women operate differently in our cycles and how our cycles impact the way we show up every single day. They impact our energy, they impact the way our brains work. Like, they literally impact every part of us. And that was what catapulted me in a whole different direction. So I started working differently. I started thinking differently. I started behaving differently, like so much, but it was all still on the back end. It was still just like things I was testing out, things I was doing. I was postpartum, so I wasn't really even sure how it was going to work. So it was a lot of research and a lot of digging in and a lot of trial and a lot of error and like all these things. And then it was probably 2, 3 years later that I started sharing it with clients, and they were like, this is game changer. Like, we need to know more about this. So that is kind of a little bit about how I got to where I am today, really helping entrepreneurs be able to do that. Like, how do we, especially female entrepreneurs, like, how do we get out of this place of working like men, and how do we create businesses that really align for how our lives are structured? Because for most of us, one, we have other things, like we have kids and we have life and we have all these things that we're juggling as entrepreneurs. It's not just our business. Like, there's so many facets to us. So like, how do we incorporate all of those and do all of those really well instead of feeling like we're failing at one of them? And how do we do that in a way that works with our energy, that allows us to take rest, allows us to have time off without feeling guilty, all of those things. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And I definitely resonate a lot with your story. It's like, it was that burnout and then feeling not enough and still wanting to be successful woman, still wanting to be a female entrepreneur. And then you also have a family. And so
Yeah.
it's like, there must be a way where I can make it work better for me versus the expectation of like kind of operating as if we're always in our ovulation or follicular phase the whole month and then constantly setting up ourselves for disappointment. I remember like for me it was just a constant comparison like with my male coworkers and male colleagues of like they're not moody. There's
Yeah,
like a couple of days in the month where I'm almost unfunctional because like my energy just drops. And I know it's different for every woman, but like it was really hard for me to even like exist and like engage with anything. And I didn't know that until I started like learning and taking courses about my body and my hormones. I'm like, oh my God, this makes a lot of sense. And if you really like maximize, like really take the time to honor each cycle and each season, like you only actually need 1 week to go full speed instead
yeah.
of going full speed but burning out, burning out, burning out. It's like not efficient. So I'd like to touch a little bit on that, on how do you approach it? Like what would you kind of express how your approach overall or your framework of how you go about it?
Yeah. I think ultimately it's like it's taking women like out of this idea that we are the same every single day and that we operate in the same calendar. I think it really is about redefining the way we look at the calendar all the way around. That women were not made and operate in this 24-hour rhythm, yet most of our life is in that space. Like most of us, and most of us have to function within that world, right? Like we have to function within the fact that we have 9 to 5s, or we're building businesses, or we've got kids in school, or like things are happening that not everything is going to revolve around our hormones, but it is looking at like how do we give ourselves a little bit more grace, like how do we adjust and accommodate to that, like how do we honor where our body's at. And I think ultimately at the very core of this, like that is what it gets back to, is like how do we listen to that feminine part of us that, like if we look at doing and going and being as being a very or like doing and going is a very masculine thing, and being and feeling is a very feminine thing. And it's like how do, as women that exist in a world that is going and doing and hustling all the time, like how do we tap back into that place of being and feeling. I said feeling together, like being and feelings is one word. But like how do we do that being and feeling? Like how do we honor those emotions? How do we honor those feelings that we're having and not see them as negative, not see them as something that we have to stuff down, not see them as something that's wrong or that we have to push through. Like I think that that's too like a big part of the messaging that we hear, is that we have to overcome our excuses. We have to push past those excuses. Like we have to do the things that nobody else is willing to do because it's hard, and like, but so much of it is like how do we actually listen to what our body's telling us to do. And when we're in alignment with what our body's telling us to do, we're going to become more effective. We're going to stop stuffing down emotions that then cause disease and trauma and all these things inside of our bodies. We're going to actually be able to feel so much more. Like it's as human beings, as a race, as a whole, like we have to get back to actually like processing what we're feeling and not just be stuck on this calendar of just going and doing all the time. And so I think that that is one of the strengths that women have, is like how do we come back to that? How do we honor what we're actually feeling? How do we listen to what our body's talking about? Like, and I kind of describe it as like the language of our bodies, because most women have never been really taught like what's actually happening with our bodies. Like we have no idea. We just like have these really massive extremes, or we're feeling different things, and so much has been normalized. Like I even have a post right now that I talked about like how feeling triggered, feeling really emotional, and feeling like totally off during that phase of your luteal phase is not normal. That it's been normalized, but it's not
Oh
normal,
wow.
right? Like for women to feel so triggered during that phase, it's not normal. Like generally that means that our hormones are not super balanced. Like we're dysregulated. Our hormones are dysregulated. And the amount of negative feedback I've gotten on that post of people that are like, good for you, perfect woman, or like whatever. And I think it just highlights for me how much our society has underserved women, like the medical community, that like, and how we've, a society as a whole has normalized like periods and this process as being such a negative thing and so painful. Now, I'm not going to negate that there are women out there that have PMDD, that have endometriosis, that have painful periods. The problem and like the reason I posted that post is because that's been normalized. Like it's been seen as like if you have these things, if you have PMDD, you have endometriosis, you have all of these painful periods, you do get super emotional and triggered. They're seen as like, so sorry, this is what it is.
Yeah.
Like your period sucks. versus like, how do we actually support your hormones so that you don't have to experience those things, or that your body doesn't have to be that extreme? And personally, that's not something that I do. I don't help women in that way, but I know lots of practitioners who do. And I know those women have seen massive success, like women who had extremely irregular periods or extremely painful things or whatever, and it's gone. And so to like, I've seen the evidence of that, that like that doesn't have to be. And so I think that just, anyway, that was a whole nother conversation, but I think
No,
like
no, I love that you touched on
it's
that, and
just a
it gave
different
me
one.
goosebumps just hearing it because you're right. I think the issue isn't that, so I think maybe you got a negative reaction because they didn't feel validated in their pain. But what you're
Yeah,
trying to address is the bigger problem is a society that never honored a female's body. And I know not every woman has the leverage to have her own business that works with her own schedule, but if we really look at the workforce, it is created for a male's body. That 9 to 5 is not it's not created for a female body because we can't operate in that way. We're very cyclical. We move with the moon, we don't move with the sun. And so that was one big point that you mentioned is like we are in a patriarchal world that really values how the male body works, and that's the essence of the problem. That's why the females are actually having trouble with their hormones. So that's just one point on its own. And then the other one is like you said with the emotions. Like my sister had endometriosis level 4, and I'm 100% sure it wasn't just something genetic. It's a stored emotion. It's trauma, and she just
yeah,
neglected her body for a very long time because for her, she's a doctor, and she always felt like I'm a go-getter. I just gotta do it, and it was always push harder. And sometimes we don't need to push harder for us to go further. We gotta, soften and go deeper and actually process these emotions for us to be more in tune with our intuition so we're able to move faster. And I think that's where the feminine power comes into place. Our power doesn't come from the chasing or pushing harder or muscling through it. It's actually our ability to really go deeper with our intuition, with our body. And that way we take much more aligned action. We're able to see things clearer. And we're still able to produce at the same level that a man can, just in a very different way, operating from a very different place. And then
yeah,
also the topic of food and health is also an effect on hormones. But I think you mentioned it really and I think it's actually really positive that you got negative feedback on it because it does really highlight of how that people are upset that you're talking about the root cause of a problem being wrong while they're still looking at the problem itself, but they're not looking at what's caused it. And that's where we're kind of like advocating is like, but the root problem is not being addressed here. The
yeah,
root problem is not being solved. And I think it's like it's such a big and important topic that I'm really happy to just when I started seeing more women like online when I saw you, it's like we need to talk more about this.
mhm,
It's not talked as even near as close as it should be. Like just the fact that when I'm working and I'm in my workspace and I can't express that I'm on my period because of the shame and because it's just why would you share it?
yeah,
I think is wrong
yeah,
because people around me need to know where I'm at energetically. I am in a very different emotional and energetic space that needs to be honored. But this whole
mhm,
disconnection is a big thing. So even when I work with women, the first thing I work with them around before even awareness is overcoming shame. It's like
mhm,
just say you're on your period. It's not a big deal because I grew up in a society where I needed to hide it even from my dad. Like
mhm,
I needed to pretend from any male that I even had my period. My dad never knew when I got my period the first time. Maybe my mom told him, maybe not. But every time I did, it's not something I'm able to say out loud. It's like, oh, there's
right,
huge shame. Like, because when we're on our period, like we can do our Muslim prayers and stuff like that. And I needed to pretend that I am doing them so I don't have to confront that. And I now growing up and doing all this unlearning and healing, I just realized how damaging it is. It's not just ridiculous, it's damaging. Because it's saying
yeah,
like you're dirty, it's saying there's something wrong with you, something to be ashamed of. And even here, like every time I start speaking up to like my male coworkers, I'm like, I'm on my period, I get this like reaction from them. It's like, why?
mhm,
How many women have you lived with for this to
yeah,
be still a taboo topic? And for us, if we don't release that taboo, we can't address the real problems like endometriosis. That's a huge thing. And I'm 100% that a big part of it is caused by poor lifestyle. It's caused by trauma held there. It's caused by shame. And so the whole relationship with the womb and the relationship with the womb starts. It's a very powerful healing journey to start with. Um,
So much.
so the other question I would love to ask you is like, for these women that work from a 9 to 5 job, what would be an advice to give them to still navigate it? Because not everybody has the capabilities or even the the desire to pursue their own business. It's
Yeah.
entrepreneurship is not for everybody, that's for sure. So
Yeah.
how have you navigated that space for yourself with your
Yeah.
clients?
Well, I think it's kind of like thinking outside the box a little bit in terms of like, what can I change? Like, what can I shift, right? When we think like everything in our lives has to revolve around our cycles, it's going to make us feel constrained and limited. Like, when really at the essence of leaning into our feminine is about creating flow, and creating about ease and about flexibility. And so it's kind of tapping into like, what possibilities can I create? Like, where can I create more of this flow and ease and alignment with my body? For a lot of women working in a 9 to 5, it's probably going to be outside of your work schedule. It's going to be looking at, how are you exercising? How are you eating? How are you sleeping? Like, what are the things that you're saying no to and saying yes to? Like, maybe you're not going out for happy hour and like out with a bunch of people at the end of the day when you're in certain phases. And other phases, you allow yourself just to like take a bubble bath and you allow yourself to go for a walk in the evening. Like, exercise is one of the number one things for me that shifts that energy throughout the month. Like, when I'm in my follicular and ovulatory phase, like, I'll go hard, I'll push hard with my workouts, I'll do it. And then in that luteal phase and the menstrual phase, I'm like, what can I do to still move my body, but yet in a way that feels nurturing and feels restorative? And so for me, a lot of times that looks like going for a walk late at night, and I'll go like around the neighborhood in the evening. It's dark, it's quiet, so it's like mentally relieving, it's physically relieving. Like, there's so many pieces to it. And so even just making those shifts from like hardcore hit workout and strength training to, I'm going to go for a nice walk solo by myself, like, those two shifts in dynamics throughout the month create such an energy fluctuation and change for me that makes my body feel a little bit more balanced. So even if it's not like I'm rehauling everything in my life, I'm just rehauling these one little areas, or I'm going to give myself permission to go to sleep, or I'm going to give myself permission to like order food this week. I'm not even going to do the dishes. I'm not doing the laundry. I'm like, what is it in your life that you can do to help lighten that load a little bit in certain phases? I think is one area. The other thing is to look at that, like, even just in our day, we're not the same, right? Like, we as women function with still in that same 24-hour rhythm. So we have circadian rhythms, the menstrual cycles are infradian rhythms, we have ultradian rhythms. Like, we have all these different rhythms, right, in our lives and in our bodies, that when we start to tap into that, there's shifts and changes that sometimes we don't recognize that we can actually make. So for me, when I was working, I used to work in acute care, predominantly. Now I still kind of work in the NICU a couple days a week, and it's different there. But when you're in the hospital, and as a therapist, I would see as many patients as I could possibly see in the morning because I knew my energy was at the highest in the morning. I would take a later lunch, and then after lunch I would come and I would sit and I would chart my entire morning, because that allowed me to, like, that afternoon lull. Like, after I ate lunch, I didn't want to go see patients anymore. I didn't want to get up and go do anything. I wanted to just like sit and decompress and relax. But in the morning, I had tons of energy. And so I would go hard in the morning and see as many patients as I possibly could, take a later lunch, sit down, and then finish and give myself that rest and reprieve time in the afternoon. So even in a 9 to 5, you might have some flexibility and some ways to create this like go hard and rest sort of element in your day that's going to make a shift too. So my challenge is, rather than saying like, well, I work a 9 to 5, this isn't going to work for me. My question would be like, what can you shift, and like, what changes can you make to align and listen to your body that work within the constraints of what you have? And I agree. I mean, corporate is definitely an area I would love to see changes happen down the road in terms of our cycles. But it really does start with the conversation. Like what you talked about, that shame. There's a study that was done that said 50% of people don't believe that we should talk about menstrual cycles in the workplace. 50%. And yet we, and as you and I, both women right here, like menstruating, we both are so impacted by it. It makes such a huge difference. And it does stem back to this shame idea that like our periods are this shameful thing that we have to hide and keep back. But just like you said, you mentioned that like periods are oftentimes seen culturally, religiously, historically, society, whatever you want to say, has been seen as a very shameful, dirty thing. It's been
Yeah,
seen as something that like we've got to hide, we can't talk about, we've got to put away. But when we look at what the period actually does, the period actually cleanses, right? So it's taking the uterus and it's cleansing and shutting everything out. It's like we tried to make a baby, like we created this womb space for a baby. We didn't conceive. So now we're cleansing and relieving everything out. There are some people that believe that it cleanses out different toxins, different things. And then on the other side of that, energetically, there's a lot of people that believe that energetically during our periods is when we cleanse and release a lot of limiting beliefs and fears and blocks and create this space for intuition. So when we start to even just shift the lens there of like, what if our periods weren't this dirty, shameful thing? It's actually a very cleansing, restorative, intuitive, releasing time, like that could change the game so much. But so much of our attachment to shame and trauma and all these things with our periods comes from the stories that we've created. My challenge for you and like the message that I'm on is, can we change the stories that we've attached to the period? Can we
absolutely.
change the meaning that we've attached to that going forward?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The thing is, so one of the things, like I said, when I worked through shame with the girls, is that it not only it affects the relationship with their period, it affects really the relationship with their womanhood and how they perceive their womanhood.
Yeah,
Like how are I call it like the initiation to womanhood. And like for me, my initiation to womanhood when I got my period, what were the events that were happening in my life as a
yeah,
result of that? So, and if it's negative, most likely I'm not going to perceive being a woman being something positive. And
right.
for years, I haven't. For years, I actually, like when I first got my period and had puberty, all of like the female features, I hid from, I hid away. I had my hair short. I acted like a boy. I didn't want to lose my freedom. I didn't want to be perceived weak. It was a quite a journey of unlearning for years to change that because of the intensity of what I went through when I first got my period. Because what really makes you a woman is like your period is like the strongest indicator of like you're female, that you're a female. So that experience is very powerful, and you in that age is also very sensitive. You're taking in a lot of
Yeah,
information of seeing how people in your environment are acting towards you now.
yeah,
And I remember me like it was kind of like now the lens is like um, even closer on every behavior I do, and if I'm doing something right or wrong. My freedom was taken away tremendously, and now I wasn't able like to go out as much as I want to. I didn't understand the pain in my body, the changes in my body, and because it wasn't handled in a way that was embraced and celebrated, it connected it to a lot of negativity. And I know there's cultures that actually throw a party for a girl when she gets her period. And I'm like,
yeah,
I can't wait for my little girl to have a little girl so I can just throw a party and celebrate her being a woman instead of like, oh, now Ryan, you're a woman. This is the list of things that you need to do, and guess what? You need to make sure to hide it.
yeah,
And it's crazy. I had one of my friends, she was so scared of all of the obligations that would be on her. She hid it from her mom for 2 years. Imagine, I thought that was crazy. She would like literally go to like her neighbor to change so her mom wouldn't say any see like her, and I just thought it was crazy that for 2 years you hid something like that from your mom. And then her mom discovered it. She never really came out and told her. It's like
yeah,
this is so ingrained. Like whether it was like a personal experience or the experience of like people around you, or even just like it's in your blood, in your lineage, in your subconscious. And I
mm-hmm.
think it's really sad, like, or just being sexualized, like, oh, now you're perceived very differently, now suddenly it's not safe to wear certain things, now you're looked at differently, and then sexual harassment becomes a thing, and it also still continues to dishonor the female body,
Yes,
continues to dishonor the cycle. And there's so much beauty. Like the more I have connected with the wisdom of my womb and the wisdom of my menstrual cycle, I actually found that my productivity level has become so much higher
yeah,
and so much clearer because, like you said, I go through a little journey every month of a death and rebirth where I reinvent myself. I set intentions and then I build on it with every season as the energy grows and grows. And then as I get to my luteal, I start like refining the things and just understanding where I'm at, my anxiety levels just went away because I'm not constantly going against my body. Versus before, I would like push while I'm on my period, and then I'm like, why am I anxious? It's because my body is telling me to relax, and here
Yeah.
I am popping a painkiller and taking 2 cups of coffee,
Yeah.
and constantly seeing it as inconvenience. And I see it so much, like it's more than I would like to see, of how many women see their period as an inconvenience of like, oh,
Hmm.
now I can't do this and that, instead of like, oh, this is a sacred time and I am looking forward to it. And now I
Yeah.
look forward to it because I actually like work a lot, and this is the only time where if I decided not to leave bed, I give myself full permission. So it's like
Yeah.
my retreat every month is the time when I bleed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I loved, there was one of your posts that I loved so much, which is like, I think you were talking about your the luteal phase, the progesterone, and how you
Uh,
can have it to attract clients. So that was
mhm.
something that was interesting for me because I still, if I'm being honest, that phase I'm still not really my favorite
Yeah.
that season. So when you reframed it, I was like, oh, this is a nice reframe. So I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that phase.
Yeah, for sure. So each one of the different phases, I believe, has one, it has a different core value that it's meeting, like what we need as women to feel balanced, but also they have superpowers. So each phase has a superpower that helps us with our productivity. It's just about redefining what that productivity looks like. It doesn't look like that hustle go all month long, right? Like that follicular phase, the energy of like push and go and do very much falls in that. The luteal phase definitely feels a little bit more retreaty. Like it can feel a little bit more emotional. We go from this high of feeling like confident and on top of the world and like we can attack anything and then we're so good and we've got this. And then that estrogen dips off and progesterone kicks in and progesterone's like, halt the brakes. I don't know. I'm feeling a little bit more emotional. I'm wondering, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know if it's possible for me. So like the energy just totally shifts. However, in that luteal phase, there's a couple like what I call the superpowers. One, it's kind of like if you've ever been pregnant in that nesting phase at the end of pregnancy when you're like, I just want to get everything done and you like wash everything, clean everything, organize everything. Like it can be very organizational. So it's a very great time for dotting your T's, crossing your I's. It's like the time of the month when I clean out my downloads folder on my computer, I clean out my desk, like I clean out my entire refrigerator. I do the whole house's laundry. Like I just go to town, but it's different productivity. It's not like putting things out there, creating big projects or doing more things. It's kind of some of that repetitive stuff. So it was the stuff that I remember years ago, I remember a coach or mentor I was working with kind of talked about like the distractions, like the things that in life that you feel are important and you feel you're doing because, but it's busy work. It's the thing that's keeping you from moving forward in what you really need to be doing in your business. And so it kind of came up like when you're negating and like procrastinating on putting this big project out or doing this big thing by doing laundry or by doing cleaning your house or like whatever, and so at the time I was like I saw all of those things like those urges to like clean everything and organize everything as being distractions and deterrents from actually taking the action that I needed in my business. And when I realized that it wasn't that, it was just like this is my body's way of like going through the month and actually me taking this time and organizing and decluttering and creating space is actually creating the space for me to do the big things. Like it's creating the cleanliness, the like mental clarity. Like we need all of those phases. So one, that is incredibly powerful for that. Like in that luteal phase, we can get so organized and so set up that it's one going to prepare you to take your rest, but also prepare you so that you have things in order for that next phase, that next big momentum phase. The other part of it is like we are so deeply connected to our emotions during that phase. Like we feel so much differently than any other phase. We might feel fears, we might feel limiting beliefs, we might feel doubts, we might feel heaviness. Like the last phase I was in, the last time I was in this phase, I literally was like talking to a friend about just like the weight of mom life and like the weight of things that moms are carrying. And I like literally was in a voice message and I just like started bawling or like crying, right? And that's not me. Like I'm not normally a big crier. I don't get heavy emotions like in spaces like that. Like I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as an overly emotional person, but I, in that phase, allowed myself to feel that way. And then, even more than that, like not just crying on the phone and like apologizing for it. It'd be like, oh my gosh, like I'm sorry, I'm crying, I'm crying. It was like, I just let myself cry. And then that next day or next couple days, I was like, where else do I need to just cry? Like, where else do I need to let this out? Right. Which I think is, you even talked about too, like at the beginning of like the trauma and stuffing things down. I think that's a big, big, big problem in our society. It's like we've conditioned ourselves like we can't cry, we can't let these emotions out, we have to stuff them down. Then it creates all these traumas and emotions and diseases inside of our bodies. But like allowing ourselves to actually feel that way, and also like even more than that, like most of us that are entrepreneurs, that allows us to really connect with our people in a much deeper way, so we can see and feel. And like when I was feeling those really heavy feelings of like the weight of mom life, it allows me to actually write content that's going to connect with my ideal person. My ideal person is somebody who's juggling mom life and running a business at the same time. And like I know without a doubt that there are those days that she's feeling that she's feeling this weight of mom life is just so much. Like I'm carrying so much and I'm trying to build a business. And so when I can get into that place of having that emotion myself and that feeling myself, it allows me to be able to write in a way that's going to be able to connect with her, that she feels seen, heard, and understood. And that's going to leverage my business going forward too. So in that phase, it's like super incredibly powerful. Like we know in, if you're in the business marketing world, like it's all about this emotion and this connection and like helping your people feel seen, heard, and understood, that they trust you. And what better way to help them trust you is to be able to feel what they're feeling and be able to connect in that way.
Absolutely. That's the biggest credibility in my opinion, is like when you know exactly where they're at on a personal level, and then they can trust you that you can get them where they need to be because, hey, I am here going through the exact same thing that you're going through. Being a mom, being an entrepreneur, having all of these things to juggle, and it's really hard. And I have moments of crying, even if I am the one who's teaching and preaching. I have those breakdown moments because I'm also human. And that vulnerability is really what creates that connection, because it's what's authentic, it's what's genuine. So yeah, I absolutely love that. It's really true. Um, Another thing that comes to my mind, just as you were talking as well, what about women on birth control? How do you go about that? Because a lot of them are just feels very disconnected when on birth control.
Yeah. Yeah, so birth control definitely, well, I mean, birth control for sure changes the way your hormones are functioning. So most of the birth controls, like I'm not gonna generalize, like they minimize the actual cycle. So like when we look at a cycle, it should like then the hormones are low and then they peak and they spike and then progesterone peaks and spikes, and it basically squashes a lot of that, so you don't actually ever feel those highs and lows. And I know a lot of women who've come off birth control that notice like brain fog goes away, they like smell things differently, they feel things differently, their brain thinks differently, because like those hormones, they do impact. So there's a lot of new research coming out right now around the changes of our brain throughout the month based on where the different hormones are out. So how estrogen and progesterone are playing out in our side of our brain, and how different parts of our brain are actually activated with different hormones. So things like we actually think differently, we actually connect differently, we actually communicate differently. Like all those different things are based on a very brain neurological sort of level. So when we synthetically add those hormones in there and change the way that's happening, it does change the way your brain is functioning. It changes, it's not just happening in our uterus, it's not just in our womb space, it literally is happening on a very systemic level. So your entire body is being impacted by those hormones. So that is oftentimes what I see. It's like and then even too, like pregnancy or postpartum, um, perimenopausal, like all of those sort of things are going to have the same thing. Like your hormones are different. You're not going to experience that same spike. So we could get a whole conversation about that. What my recommendation oftentimes is that women who function still in a 24-hour rhythm oftentimes feel more balanced and they feel more aligned than when they're just going all the time. So My recommendation for just like loosely, I like work case by case with every person, but would be to say to follow the moon and follow the moon cycle and use that as your external guide to create that same monthly rhythm. Depending on the situation of your body, oftentimes your body learns. Like it's the same thing. Like if we were to look at intermittent fasting or waking up early or things like that, like when you start a new habit, your body is like, nope, nope, not gonna do it. Like I don't want to get up at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning every day. Like I'm used to waking up at 8 o'clock. Like I want to hit snooze and I hit snooze and I hit snooze. And then over time, eventually you reset that circadian rhythm, right? Your body's rhythm changes. Like you teach your body like, hey, this is the new rhythm that we're on. And then it starts waking up at 5 a.m. without the alarm clock, just on its own, because you've reset that circadian rhythm. Can happen the same way with our menstrual cycle. When we help lean into our cycle and we help live in alignment with that, we help reset that body's rhythm and reset that body's clock so that it feels more in alignment with that. So I've seen a lot of women actually help regulate their hormones by actually leaning into their cycle, those irregular cycles mellowing out, all those types of things. It definitely is different though. Like I will say it's definitely different when you're on birth control or permanent postpartum, all those different things because the hormones are not the same. But it's definitely possible. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I love your take on it, and I definitely second that. I've actually helped a lot of women with irregular periods, which are a whole conversation on its own, too. Aside from just, going through the health and just like connecting, I think one of the most powerful practices that I have them do is connecting to the moon. And I just literally say, like, when you see a full moon, go breathe into the full moon and just let that connection happen, and with time it actually starts syncing up a little bit better. So I absolutely like agree with the power of connecting to nature and the seasons of nature, because our body is nature too. So the female body, the more in tune you are actually with mother nature, the more you're going to be better in tune with your own body as well.
mhm.
So if they are in birth control, I think I absolutely agree with you. Having a connection with the moon and the cycle of the moon can be very helpful and beneficial. So
Yeah.
setting the intention with the new moon and then just having the same cycle go with it. And then, I mean, even the weather affects our mood. So I absolutely agree. Like I have my new moon and full moon ceremonies all the time. And they happened actually, full moon ceremonies actually started because of the red tent, because women bled together. So that's like a strong statement that like we are very connected to the moon. And
Uh-huh.
so having a connection to nature, having a connection to the moon, having a connection to the seasons, so something external to help them with the internal can also be very beneficial. And I love your take on that for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was such an amazing and insightful conversation, and thank you so much for hopping on here with me. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we close the live?
Yeah. I feel like that was good. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about, we touched on a lot of points. Thank you so much. I appreciate you,
Thanks.
and I wish you an amazing rest of your day.
You as well. Thanks so much for having me.
For sure. Bye.
Bye.